Hello and welcome everyone to Chatham House member events on a very beautiful London evening actually, and thank you very much for choosing the event over this very nice weather. We have both people in person and on the line as well. So this is an hybrid event, so therefore we will be also having a quite good audience online as well. And this is on Turkey's upcoming election. The title is "The Turkey at the Crossroads," and probably you have already seen many articles with the same titles, and probably you will see also many events with the same titles, because this election is really and does really matter. So it's not a cliche, Turkey at the crossroads, because at stakes are the future of Turkish democracy, the future of Turkish foreign policy, the future of Turkey's position in great power competition, in international affairs, so the future of Turkish economy. So the stakes cannot be really high about this election. And also this election, for the first time probably in 2 decades, we don't know the result of it ahead of the election. I mean, that might be a bit surprising or come across a bit cynical, but actually over the last 2 decades, almost we knew the result of all elections in advance, because more or less we knew what will be the result. So this is the first election in which we cannot foretell the result in advance. So here to discuss all the impact and implication of this election, to discuss it, to unpack it, we have a great line of speakers here, both at Chatham House but also on the line. So we will be discussing the impact of this election on Turkish democracy, Turkish foreign policy, Turkish-US relationship, Turkey's relation with Europe, Turkey's positioning on the war in Ukraine, relation with Russia, the position in the Middle East. So there are quite many topics to cover. I hope that we'll have enough time to cover them. So let me first introduce my speakers, and then also, before I actually introduce my speakers, some house rules. This is on record, so therefore the Chatham House rules doesn't apply. So if you want to ask questions under the Chatham House rules, just you know that this is not a Chatham House rules event. And for the people online, please pose your questions in the chat box, so I will ask it to the speakers. And also for the audience, if any of you have questions, please raise your hand, the mic will come to you. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the speakers. On my left hand, we have Yaprak Gürsoy. She is the chair of Turkish Studies at London School of Economics. On my right hand is the Güney Yıldız, a doctoral researcher at Cambridge University and longtime journalist with BBC, and also with the German Institute for International Security Affairs researcher with SWP in Berlin. Online we have Fuat Keyman, who is the director of Istanbul Policy Center, and also in Washington we have Gönül Tuğul, who is the director of Turkey program at Middle East Institute in Washington. So Yaprak, let me start with you actually, since the election, the nexus between election and democracy is the most contested one. So very simple question, what does this election mean for Turkish democracy?
Very simple, yes. Thank you very much, first of all, Guy, for inviting us and for organizing this event. It's a privilege to be here at Chatham House and to share the stage with these distinguished speakers. Well, the answer to the question and the implications of the elections for Turkish democracy can be answered from the perspective of institutions, or institutions of democracy, or conditions that make democracy possible. And here we're talking about the elections themselves, freedoms, and the rule of law. Here, I think a lot of research has already covered the fact that the Turkish democracy has been eroding for over a decade. And so the elections, of course, mean perhaps the reversal of that erosion. But since this is something that has been covered relatively well in the literature and in media, what I would like to focus on instead is the spirit of democracy, or the political culture that makes democracy possible. So here we can say that there are 3 components that I think that I observe to be important for Turkey and for Turkish democracy. So these are trust, participation, and cooperation. So for a democracy to be able to sustain itself, these three elements of political culture should be present. Now, we have a mixed picture right now in front of us, both in terms of the election campaign and also for developments after the elections. In terms of trust, this is where I see the most negative elements and the most negative components for the Turkish democracy. Trust means trust to institutions, trust to political parties, and also trust of people toward one another. So neighbors trusting one another, communities trusting one another. But due to increased polarization for again over a decade in Turkey and the constant fear and the constant suspicion of communities toward one another, political parties, people, unfortunately, there has been a major erosion of the trust, and we are witnessing an era of distrust. And this distrust is still growing strong. If you look at the electoral campaign, the opposition believes that the government will not hand power if the opposition wins. So we have the distrust element there. These are just examples. And the government uses scare-mongering tactics, which increases fear, of course, and also increases distrust. Now, the second element is participation, where there are mixed, let's say, mixed results there. So on the positive side, we can say that participation in democracy and democratic institutions is alive and well when it comes to elections, which is the greatest hope, I would say. And it's also a great hope that both the opposition and the government actually think that they might be losing the elections. So for that reason, participation increases, and we are expecting high voter turnout. But there is a negative side to this element. In democracies, we would expect grassroots mobilization, engagement with local politics, and engagement with civil society organizations, participation in civil society organizations. This is not there. I don't observe it particularly. And then the final component is the cooperative spirit, the availability of negotiation and tolerance. So this is related to trust. We need democracy as a system where winner does not take it all. It shouldn't be like that. The positive side about that is the opposition now consists of different political parties coming from different ideological backgrounds. So in the future, we are going to perhaps see more cooperative spirit. And then the final optimistic note I would like to end with is, and this is not a popular view at all, but I believe that the composition of the parliament, where nobody really securely holds the majority, might lead to or force groups to negotiate with each other, support cooperation, and the split between the legislature and the executive. For this reason, I think might not be a bad idea.
Just a follow-up question. I mean, there is usually a wide skepticism or question arising regarding the election security. So what would you say there?
I think that's the trust. I would put that under the trust component.
Fuat Hocam, the future of Turkish foreign policy has been hotly debated in recent years. So what is this election mean for Turkish foreign policy?
Thank you, Galip. Let me begin by thanking you and the Chatham House for inviting me. It's an honor. If the opposition wins the election, I think we will actually see very significant changes in Turkish foreign policy, both in terms of scope, actors, and making. I think the first thing to do is to say actually is if the opposition wins, the government will adapt. And I'm saying this on the basis of their campaign promises and also my actually interviews with the leaders of the opposition. The government will adopt a more pro-NATO, pro-EU and pro-European stance while preserving its economic ties with Russia and the rest of the world. The government will attempt to strengthen its strategic anchor with the West, situate Turkey's strategic vision in the West, but also opening Turkey to the global engagements, institutional arrangements, and relations. I think the anchor with the West will be definitely strong, strengthened. I think after the election, one of the first things that the Turkish government will do actually is to approve Sweden's entry into NATO membership. But on the other hand, we will actually see certain continuities. Turkey will actually maintain its balance role between Ukraine and Russia, but at the same time readjusting its relations with Russia. It will be much more economically, much more balancing and maintaining this actually delicate balance. Turkey will also maintain its role in the grain corridor in terms of the food crisis. But the second aspect, very briefly, there will be a very significant reinstitutionalization of foreign policy, both in terms of actors and in terms of making. Foreign affairs will be strengthened. Foreign minister will be quite important, initiating and also carrying out foreign policy. The leader-based foreign policy, the time of leader-based foreign policy will be over, and we'll see actually not leader to leader, but foreign affairs and foreign affairs minister and foreign affairs minister type of relations. There will be much more cooperation between foreign affairs and economic affairs. They will actually look at foreign policy not only from the security angle, but also from the economy and energy angle. And we will see that the Foreign Affairs Ministry will actually have a more inclusive approach towards think tanks, civil society organizations, and experts. There will be much more deliberative foreign policy making actually after the election. If the incumbent government wins, I think the transactionalism will continue. I think the government will actually again approve the Sweden entry, but my actually fear is that if the incumbent government wins, the existing or foregoing the problem of trust and sort of risky relations with the West, with transatlantic world, and also ties with Russia is kind of an ambiguous ties with Russia will actually remain. So in this sense, I don't see very much bright future for Turkish foreign policy if the incumbent government wins, but there will be significant changes if the opposition wins.
I will come to this actually. I mean, among the things that you said, all of them are important, but two issues particularly stands out that will have a more economy-centric foreign policy rather than this geopolitical power play. And secondly, that the foreign policy making process and ecosystem will change in Turkey and the implication of it on the Turkish foreign policy. So I will come to you, particularly in the second round, because that also has significant impact on Turkish-European relationship, particularly the economy angle. But let me now go to Gönül. Gönül, in recent years, Turkish-US relationship, Turkey's relationship with transatlantic community at large has been quite crisis-ridden. We went from one crisis to another. So how this election is likely to affect Turkey's place in the transatlantic community and particularly relation with the US?
Well, thank you, Galip and Chatham House for putting this event together. Well, it depends. If in the scenario of an opposition win, I think Turkish-US partnership will be determined by several factors where Turkey stands on these issues. And the first one is, I think, on Russia. The opposition keeps saying that they will pursue a more balanced approach, meaning, and I agree with Fuat Hoca, that it's not going to be a dramatic change there. Russia is an important energy and trade partner, meaning that Turkey cannot really afford to alienate Russia. So there will be some continuity there. Turkey will have to work with Russia in places where both countries' interests overlap. But I think the most significant difference could be on two files, and one of them is the S-400. Now, the opposition's foreign policy document does not mention specifically the S-400 question, but if you talk to opposition figures, they highlight that they would like to return to the F-35 program, I'm not sure if that's if that's realistic or not, but that's something that they say they would pursue. And I think in between the lines, that means that they are willing to come up with a creative solution to the S-400 question. So if that happens, I think that will open a new chapter, has the potential to open a new chapter in Turkey-US ties. And the second thing is, I think, the sanctions. Yes, Turkey under a new government will work with Russia, but I don't think it will go out of its way to allow Russia to circumvent Russian Western sanctions. And that is going to be a welcome change from the point of view of Washington. Washington has been quite uneasy with what Erdogan has been doing with Russia after the invasion of Ukraine. There are a lot of Russian companies set up in Turkey. Russian oligarchs are welcome. So in many ways, Erdogan has thrown a lifeline to Putin after Ukraine invasion, and that's been a huge disappointment from Washington's point of view. So if the new government does not engage in such activity, I think that's going to be another welcome change from Washington's point of view. And another file that is important from the US point of view is where Turkey stands on China. Now, I don't think there's going to be a dramatic change under a new government in Turkey's China policy. Erdogan keeps referring to Turkish-China relations as a strategic partnership. I don't think it's a strategic partnership. It's mostly based on trade, and from Erdogan's point of view, attracting investment is a key component of that policy. But the opposition has been very critical of Erdogan's silence in the face of Uyghur, what China is doing to the Muslim community there. So you could expect a slight change in narrative. Maybe the new government could be more critical of China's human rights record, but I don't think that's going to be a dramatic change, given Turkish economy is going to be in trouble, and attracting investment from China is, I'm sure, going to be one of the options that the new government wants.
A very brief question, like a 1-minute question, because one issue that will be on the agenda from day one will be whether the US will sell the F16 to Turkey. And any opposition government would also want to return back to the F35 program. How possible are they? Very briefly.
From a production, I mean, purchasing F-35 is something else, but going back into the production cycle, I think is going to be very difficult. But I think the first thing to consider is whether the US is going to be willing to sell F-16s to a new government, a government who promises to pursue a peaceful, diplomacy-oriented approach vis-a-vis its neighbors. I think the members of Congress that I talked to recently point out that a new government, a more democratic country, is a Turkey that they're looking forward to work with. So I think selling F-16 could be seriously on the agenda, but I'm not quite sure about Turkey's request to go back in the production line of F-35s. And another thing that will also be critical in I think, Turkey-West ties under a new government is what Turkey does in Syria. In the past, as you know, Syria has been a big inflection point and caused a lot of frustration. So what Turkey does there is important. And Erdogan, as you know, has made a U-turn there. And I think one of the first foreign policy moves from the new government is going to be shaking hands with Syria. If that comes down to withdrawal of Turkish troops, that could significantly impact US's Syria policy and things on the ground.
Thank you. Güney, if you read any articles in recent years, or if you just go through the articles that has been produced on Turkish foreign policy recently, you will see a lot of talks on Turkish-Russian relationship. I mean, that is creating a lot of curiosity. So how this election is likely to affect Turkish-Russian relationship, but particularly Turkey's position on the invasion of Ukraine?
Yeah, thank you, Galip. I mean, it's a first privilege to be here. First, the Turkish-Russian relationship, the dynamic of Turkish-Russian relationship is different from, Turkey's relations with its allies. And it's because of how Turkey, it's mainly due to how Turkey divides its foreign policy. Like Turkey sees, categorizes foreign policy into two: foreign policy with difficult and high maintenance friends, like the West, which makes a lot of noise on human rights and democracy, but high maintenance. So, and there are dangerous enemies. And Russia belongs to this camp, dangerous rivals. Iran belongs to this camp and others. So Turkey knows full well that the West wouldn't try to destabilize Turkey, security-wise, for example, on any issue, and will come to Turkey's help. But Russia can very easily, and it has demonstrated that it can destabilize Turkey. So Turkey is more responsive to countries like Russia. And the next government will still continue to be the same, I think. And Turkish-Russian relations are multi-layered. And all these layers include lots of risks. For example, Turkey and, I mean, what I called in a previous article adversarial collaboration, the relationship between the two. So one, there's energy cooperation, there's tourism links, there's cooperation, coordination, deconfliction in Syria, in Libya and South Caucasus. These issues are not going anywhere. I mean, there are possibilities of some resolutions. So each of these contain risks, each of these relations, but when you have too many layers, all contain risk, it actually balances itself because you don't want to risk everything else for just one policy file. So I want to say, like, what will remain the same and what will change in the next government. So, I mean, we can't look for an answer how the government will, how a new government, if the opposition wins, will behave, because Erdogan himself, the same person, behaved quite differently in the 20 years. So it doesn't, we need to understand whether the Turkish foreign policy is determined by geopolitical necessities or ideological convictions. It's clearly not ideological convictions, because Erdogan went from shooting down a Russian fighter jet to being the best friend, with Putin. What will remain the same are geopolitical reasons, which is the U.S. gradual withdrawal from the Middle East, which means that Turkey can no longer outsource its foreign policy in the Middle East to the West. Even a CHP government or whoever is in power. There are also strategic reasons. I mean, the world is increasingly multipolar, and Turkey, even in the past as well, will never side fully with one actor, which has implications to Ukraine as well. There is overwhelming anti-Americanism across the political spectrum in domestic policy. So any government would find it difficult to be openly friendly with the US, and this creates an opportunity for the public to be open to narratives coming from countries like Russia, not because they're pro-Russian, but they're anti-American. And there are also actors that some of the actors will remain the same. So, who is influential in Turkish foreign policy today and in the last decade are the presidency and the security establishment, both intelligence and the military. Both of these actors will still be there, so that's also another point of continuation. But as Fuat Hocam and Gönül mentioned, there will be some changes, like the institutionalization, which has already been mentioned, so I'll skip that. But there are also tactics. For example, when Sweden applied to become member of NATO, President Erdogan saw it as an opportunity to use his leverage against others. But the CHP's main foreign policy people were saying that was a irresponsible move. We should have not risked our multi-layered relationship with NATO.
Güney, very briefly also the Middle East, because I think the contemporary Turkey's vision of international affairs has been largely shaped by what's happening in the Middle East. So it saw the world through the Middle East. So very briefly, what would change in Turkey's position in the Middle East?
Well, Turkey's position in the Middle East has already changed extremely dramatically in the last, in the last year. President Erdogan went from being having antagonistic relationship with Egypt, the President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi of Egypt, UAE, Saudi Arabia, even Syria, to like trying to normalize all these relations. I think this trend will be continue. Why is this trend is there? There are multiple reasons, but also geopolitical reasons, which is the Middle East, the landscape in the Middle East is changing rapidly as well. Like if you've seen Chinese brokered normalization relationship between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and Russian-steered normalization relationship between Turkey and Syria and Saudi Arabia and Syria. So Turkey cannot continue its previous policy. One thing I expect could be different is, Turkey is having these resets and de-escalations with these powers, but still it also escalates in certain areas, which is mostly centered on the Kurdish issue. So Turkey is trying to become to friendly relationship with everyone else, but not for example, one of the two main political parties in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, like the PUK. And also Turkey, expressed this desire to conduct a large-scale operation inside Syria. So friendly relations with everyone except the Kurds. So this has domestic policy consequences.
Will this change or not change?
I think it will change because the opposition, there's potential for it to change because the opposition is receiving support from the Kurdish voters in Turkey, which will affect its domestic policy. And if domestically Turkey has less problems with the Kurds, regionally it will be replicated.
Gönül, I think many people in this house will be asking about what's going to happen to Sweden's NATO membership. Fuat Hoca already said that probably that will be approved irrespective of who wins. But what's your take? So when we go to Vilnius Summit, NATO Vilnius Summit, will we see this issue have been already resolved by then?
Well, no, I certainly think that no matter who wins in the upcoming vote, Sweden's accession is going to be approved. But I don't know if they will make it because when is the summit? In June, right? So it might be, depending on what the new parliament looks like, maybe it won't happen by then, but I think it will certainly happen soon. And one just thing that I forgot to mention in the first round, I didn't talk about the scenario in which Erdogan wins. What will happen to Turkey's relations with the West? I think the common thinking is that Erdogan will pursue a closer relationship with Western countries, including the United States and European Union, mainly because he will want to attract investment, given the dire state of Turkish economy. Obviously, that's a possibility, but this is how I see things. I think if Erdogan wins another term, we're going to see a more unstable country. And when autocrats face domestic uncertainty and instability, they usually turn to more aggressive foreign policy. And that is a possibility. And the second thing is that Western investment might not be pouring into a Turkey where Erdogan wins another term, right? So that means Erdogan could turn further to other autocratic countries who have already thrown their support behind him. So that will drive a further wedge, drive a further wedge between Erdogan and Western countries.
Thank you. Fuat Hocam, there has always been a very close connection between Turkey's European journey and the quality of its democracy. So how do you see the nexus between Turkey-EU relationship and also the impact of its domestic democracy in Turkey being affected by this election?
Thank you. I think again, there is a difference, or who wins will make a difference. If the incumbent government wins, I think the problem of trust will continue. The problem of the existing transactional relations in terms of the refugee issue, energy will actually continue. But that will be the end of Turkey's membership to EU, the end of any possibility of opening accession negotiations with the EU. So in this sense, although I agree with Gönül that the Erdogan or the incumbent government might actually have to re-establish its relation with Europe, EU, NATO, and the United States, but the most likely scenario that the existing problem of trust will continue between these parties. But if the opposition wins, I think there will be significant changes. To start with, maybe Yaprak's first point about trust. I think there will be actually a process of rebuilding trust between Turkey and the EU, and I think this confidence building and trust building process will include civil society organizations and think tanks. As Istanbul Policy Center, we will be actually working on these issues in terms of Turkey-EU relations. And secondly, multilateralism will be the main actually, or rules-based multilateralism will be actually the framing process in terms of Turkey-EU relations. There will be the elimination of hurdles in Turkey-EU relations, by which I mean, for instance, Osman Kavala will be released. Some of the political prisoners will be released. There will be actually restoration of rule of law Turkey, at least in terms of releasing the prisoners and reassess the process of more impartial and independent judiciary. So in this sense, today, for instance, the main hurdle erosion, institutional erosion, and autocracy in Turkey. I think these things will be eliminated from the government. The government will try to actually establish trust as much as possible, as I said, through civil society organizations and think tanks. I think trust and confidence building will be the first agenda. There will be actually also, internal developments in Turkey. I think Turkey is a country very tired of severe polarization and autocracy and authoritarianism. And as a matter of fact, if the opposition wins, there will be actually a winning on the basis of what we call table of six different ideological groups, political parties, and then ideological references are working together. There will be some kind of actually move to remedy or overcome severe polarization in Turkey. There will be some opening for democratic reform or opening the possibilities of living together, establishing trust in Turkey between citizens and institutions and the government, especially individuals and the justice and the other kind of systems that will reflect on Turkey relations. What I expect as a last point, maybe Turkey, and that's what we are actually also debating in Turkey in terms of how to actually start the process of trust building, confidence building, so that we re-energize, revitalize Turkey relations, especially all at the same time Turkey-NATO relations. There will be not much emphasis on the full membership or the accession period. I think there will be actually efforts to bring together Turkey and the other European countries to work together in terms of Syria, in terms of tackling with unprecedented global challenges, climate change, food security, and other things. And as a matter of fact, and also Turkey and the EU will work together with the NATO to have a balance in terms of Russia and the Ukraine. Turkey is a very pivotal country from Baltics to the Black Sea. And the last point, I think, what needs to be done to re-energize Turkey relations is to put Turkey back on the European agenda in terms of European debates about security architecture, dealing with the war, dealing with actually climate crisis and other crises. There will be significant changes, as I see it, if the opposition wins. That's what we've been talking about and working actually in Turkey, trying to open actually windows of opportunity to re-energize to revitalize these relations. But nevertheless, I think it is fateful and pivotal elections. And as you said, in the very beginning, I think what will be decided in Turkey in terms of this election will the implications not only domestically but also regionally and globally. And Europe and EU-Turkey relations are quite important in that sense.
Thank you. Yaprak, I think there has been extensive discussion on the implication of this election on Turkish democracy, but what else are at stake in terms of Turkish domestic politics?
Well, if I may, I mean, this is, we are gathered here to talk about the elections, and you described it as crossroads. But I would like to talk a little bit about the aftermath of the elections in more general sense of the term, and to say that, yes, we are at a crossroads, but the road ahead is bumpy one way or another, even if the opposition wins or the government stays in power. We are facing at the moment, I'm going to just name three main challenges that Turkey is facing. The first one is the economy. The second one is the social psychology of the Turkish people after the earthquake. And the final one is the status of refugees. We can come back to these in the Q&A. But whoever wins the elections will face the calamity of the economy, and this is going to be very difficult to reverse, although the opposition believes that with the re-establishment of the rule of law and a return to orthodox liberal policies, it's going to signal to the markets that Turkey is a safe place to invest in. And then that will result in more foreign direct investment. And of course, more orthodox policies would also mean that there will be a better control of inflation. And of course, giving central bank independence and communicating with the people and foreign investors in a more orthodox manner again would result in the rebuilding of trust, which is also very important for the economy. Now, the second element is the aftermath of the earthquake. I'm going to be relatively brief here. I think we have all experienced collective trauma. I've talked about this in other places and I've written on it as well. There is no better description of what has happened other than collective trauma. So it was a combination of grief, shock, anger, again distrust, and also fear that nobody's homes are actually safe, that they cannot really trust the state institutions to save them or to rescue them. So this is going to be very difficult for generations. We are going to have the impact of the earthquake. The status of refugees is also highly difficult to handle. And then we're seeing, because of a combination of all of these things, protest votes of the third candidate, which reached at one point in time 10%, probably even higher. And it's mostly youth voters, so young people. So we are facing, in the next few years, young people with completely different agendas, with completely different issues, and how is Turkey, any government, going to handle all of these problems combined with the dissatisfaction of young people?
Thank you. Well, we have already many questions in the house and also online, so let's start here. The gentleman at the front. Please state briefly who you are, and please keep your questions briefly to only one question.
That's very challenging considering the breadth that we've covered. But yes, my name is Piotr. I'm from the World Bank, previously Crisis Group, and I run the Global Gambit podcast. But I really appreciate the comments here today. I want to focus on fringe issues, specifically a couple of ones. Number one, Turkish Cypriot relations are ongoing in terms of trying to find a long-lasting peace deal. What do the panel consider that to be? And then the second one is more the focus, which is no mention of the Lachin corridor, Nagorno-Karabakh. Turkey and Russia have a cooperatively competitive relationship, and I want to know what we think this new government could do for that as well. Thank you.
The third, yes.
Annette War, Russia-Eurasia Programme, Chatham House. My question is in relation to the Central Asian states. Erdogan has been very much trying to step up his influence in the region, particularly through the Organization of Turkic States. These states are feeling a bit of a security vacuum at the moment and have been looking to Turkey. Some have received drones from Turkey, while Tajikistan has received drones from Iran. So my question is, how far do you think Turkey would be willing to step up in terms of being a security provider for this region, and would it be worried about Russian concerns in this respect?
Yes. The third row here.
Yeah. Thank you very much. My name is Abdi Fatah. I'm from Somalia originally, so my accent. I want to ask, what was the economic position of the Turkey before the Erdogan? And in terms of the global ties, Turkey had less ties with Africans, but right now they have more than 40 or something. Is that a good thing or bad thing?
And then, yeah.
Hi, I'm Lorenzo. I'm a student at SOAS in Politics for the Middle East. My question is coming back to the trust point that you touched before. So how likely is it to Erdogan to concede the elections the day after if he lost the elections, especially after the declaration, the comment of the Minister of the Interior about the possible coup? Yeah.
Well, thank you. There are still many questions, hands raised. So let's go to the panel. So please try to keep it to 1.5 minutes if possible. Gülen, let me start with you because there has been a few questions on the about the Middle East and also Turkey, Russia, one on Nagorno-Karabakh. So.
Yeah, I'd like to...
you can select and answer any questions, actually.
Yeah, the first question I can respond, but the second one I need a bit of a reminder. Very sorry about that. On Nagorno-Karabakh and Cyprus. Nagorno-Karabakh is becoming increasingly complicated issue with multiple different actors are being increasingly involved. So it's not just like Armenia versus Azerbaijan with Turkey and Russia involved, but also Iran is being pit more and more against Azerbaijan, also because of Israel's relations with Azerbaijan. We also have Chinese potential interest in this area with the connection of the the corridor. We also see Georgia and also some strange indications from Armenia about pursuing anti-Russian policies. So it is extremely complicated, and it's a state issue. It's not necessarily. I mean, this policy has been run mostly by the security establishment. I don't expect there to be much change on this issue. But if you ask me how Turkey will behave, there will be continuation. But how they're going to behave will depend on other regional components. On Cyprus, I think the main difference will be Turkey. We need to I think underline that Turkey. President Erdogan has this dramatic messages, but he actually, at the end of the day, he's very careful not to cross the real red lines. There are real red lines that are put forward by the West, and there are phony or fake red lines. The phony and fake red lines are mostly about European Court of Human Rights decisions need to be approved, or freedom of expression and others. They will never lead to any sanctions on Turkey. But S-400 and Turkish oil drillings in oil and gas exploration in the Mediterranean are those two. So we will not hear if elected President Kılıçdaroğlu to say one night we will come to invade Greece, which President Erdogan said more than once. But still, the arguments against Greece and Cyprus about the rest will still be there. And I've already heard them from the main foreign policy people from the CHP.
Gülen, would you like to address any questions?
Yeah, sure. Maybe the Turkey's relations with Turkic states question. That's nothing new. Turkey has been trying to cultivate closer trade and linguistic ties in the post-Soviet space since the 1990s. And Turkey has been seeking Asia inroads with Russia distracted, especially after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, spooked neighbors, Moscow's neighbors in Central Asia, and that kind of paved the way for Turkey's boosted efforts. But I think, as in the past, those efforts have been hampered by lingering Russian influence. So the question becomes, how long will Russia be tied up in this war, and whether its influence there is going to wane to the point that will provide some opening to Turkey. And I can easily see a new government. Again, this wasn't Erdogan's doing. This was done previously. A new government can seek closer ties with these states, but it might not entirely be up to Turkey. And on the question about conceding elections, I think I keep saying this in the last 2 weeks because there's a lot of concern about, and they're not unfounded concerns, by the way. Whether the election is going to be entirely free, whether Erdogan is going to accept the results. Now, looking at his track record, we know that there are a lot of question marks and anxiety around election security. He's done this before in 2017, very controversial referendum. In 2019, he didn't accept the results, and he could do that again. But we should keep in mind that Turkey is not Russia, yet at least. That means elections still matter, and even autocrats, they need elections to have the veneer of legitimacy. So that means they cannot engage in the crudest forms of election rigging. So if, let's say, there's a wide enough margin, Erdogan is just going to have to walk away and concede. But if it's not wide enough, and in the post-earthquake context where there are 8 million voters there, and we don't know how many of them registered, so that's a lot of gray area, and Erdogan can engage in election rigging. But again, there are limits to what he can do in terms of stealing the elections or not accepting the results. And one key thing, and I'll end it there, is in such a scenario where Turkish bureaucracy stands, and I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that Turkish bureaucracy will back Erdogan, and Erdogan who has lost elections. And we've seen signs of that. I think Turkish bureaucracy is hedging its bets, and might not be willing to support an Erdogan who just doesn't want to accept the election results.
Thank you. Fuat Hocam?
Yes, I will actually answer some of the questions. For instance, in terms of the question about the Turkey-Africa relations, because my think tank works on these issues, both from the perspective of economy and humanitarianism. I think there will be continuity in that regard. If the opposition wins, there will be no, sort of stopping of those, these relations with Africa. As a matter of fact, when you look at the Turkey-Africa relations last 10, 15 years, it actually, sort of growing steadily, and that will continue. Both with Turkey's relation with the post-Soviet, Turkic states, and that there will be continuity there too, actually. And but I think in terms of Turkish foreign policy, the discourse style and the foreign policy making will be different. I think it will be much more, multilateral, much more reference to the institutional arrangements. For instance, like sort of when we talk about Turkey's relation with Cyprus, it will actually be brought back to the UN framework, the European framework. And then I think more institutional framework-based or rules-based multilateral references will be used in Turkish foreign policy making. But most of the areas from Africa to Turkish status. But I think, in terms of Turkey-Cyprus relation, there will be actually a change in terms of Turkey's foreign affairs ministry in actually Cyprus, and they are actually the way that they behave. We will be much actually sort of an institutional multilateral framework. I agree with Gönül that from Turkey's perspective, someone living in Turkey following the Turkish elections, I still believe that there will be a political, sort of shift, government shift actually in the election. So I think it was important elections, sort of pivotal elections in terms of foreign policy and domestic policies too. But the Turkish voters, it is Turkey's choice. Turkish voters, Turkish people's choice in this election, what kind of Turkey they will live in, what kind of Turkey they will see in the world, and their votes, their attendance to the election, which is always high, will determine the result, and we will actually see what kind of government we will have on the basis of Turkish people's vote in that actually election.
Thank you, Hocam. Yaprak.
Yes, I mean, everybody has pretty much covered all of the questions.
The concession.
the conceding, yes. So that question, I think Gönül has answered that question very well. But maybe I can draw on some of the political science literature on that. If Turkey is a hybrid regime, if we label it as a competitive authoritarian regime, competitive authoritarian regimes are actually highly unstable regimes. They can go either way. They can turn more authoritarian, or they can have a democratic, let's say, breakthrough. While Turkey, because it's a very plural society, it's a heterogeneous society with a history of democracy, with social media that is very active, it would be very difficult to establish a consolidated authoritarian regime. So my expectation would be for Turkey to go towards a more democratic path sooner or later. Would Erdogan concede in this particular election? It depends, exactly like Gönül said, on the margin of the win, and it depends on what the opposition voters will do if he decides not to concede. Because of all the tensions, it might not be the situation where, because people are hopeful now, if the margin is very small, if Erdogan doesn't leave, I mean, it's hard to tell what's going to happen in terms of people protesting and the results. If I were Erdogan, I would actually take exit guarantees. There's also an established literature on that. So it is possible to negotiate your way out of power and then be in the opposition very gracefully and enjoy being in the opposition, because the government in the opposition will have difficulties, right? The economy is not going to, there's not going to be a magic wand that will solve all of Turkey's problems overnight. They are going to have major difficulties. So in the opposition, Erdogan will be more popular than he is now.
Thank you. Well, we have also many questions online, so I apologize to people because we already have 14 questions, so I will have to only choose 3 of them, and then I will come back to the audience as well, to pick the last 3 questions. So some of the questions has already been addressed. One of them, Yaprak, what does this election mean for the Syrian refugees?
It is, unfortunately, it's bad news for them, I would say. So the opposition is very clear. Kılıçdaroğlu has made a video very recently and said that they're definitely going to, in 2 years' time, make the refugees return to their home countries. What was interesting in that video from my perspective is that he explained that we won't be able to welcome them anymore because of environmental concerns, because of environmental issues, and he didn't mention the civil war at all in the video. But he also started the video by saying we're not racists. So there you go. But that's the policy of the opposition. And then the third and the fourth candidate, according to polls right now, is adamant in terms of, and that's a single issue, political party. They're against refugees. So the government, one way or another, would have to handle this, even if Erdogan wins the elections. And it is going to be very difficult to make them return. I mean, I really, Güney can say more about this in terms of like what kinds of deals should be struck with the Middle East and the European Union in order to make this possible.
Sure. A question actually, I mean, one of the online participants is asking, we have this discussion largely about, from one perspective, how does this affect Turkey's policy towards the West? But what does this election mean for the West? How will it change the Western behavior towards the Turkey? Will we see, for instance, restart of the EU membership talks? So maybe Fatoja and Gönül can very briefly say, will this election also change the Western behavior towards Turkey in any significant way, particularly when it comes to fundamental issues, like, the fundamental issue of the framework in Turkish-European relationship, which is the membership. Is the membership not working because of the authoritarianism in Turkey, or it was not going to work anyway? So authoritarianism was only a good cover for the European to say no to to Turkey. So if you can just like briefly address it, 1 minute Fuat Hocam, 1 minute Gönül. Fuat Hocam.
I mean, when you look at, the way that Brussels talks about Turkey, Berlin, London talk about Turkey, even Washington, what I see actually is that for a long time they have big difficulty of envisioning Turkey without Erdogan. They are actually more, leaning towards transactional relations in terms of the refugee issue and energy issues. And also Turkey actually is quite functional to these capitals because they were containing refugees and they were fighting against ISIL. And the government, the Erdogan government, didn't have any actually aspiration towards EU membership or, revitalizing accession process. But I have seen actually very recently change actually in these capitals that they will look at actually, elections from a different angle with different eyes, that maybe Turkey without Erdogan is a possibility, or maybe they will actually see after the election Turkey without Erdogan, and how they're going to approach Turkey without Erdogan. In that respect, I think they are preparing themselves too. I think these relations are, not one-way traffic. Actually, it's as much as if the opposition wins, or if there's a change in Turkey towards revitalizing Turkey's relation with Europe, NATO, EU, and the United States and transatlantic alliance, of course, the Western parties actually look at Turkey in a different angle by actually appreciating what is going on in Turkey, complexities in Turkey, and they also need to go beyond transactionalism. They also need to actually work with Turkish partners. That's what we like to do actually in Turkey. That's what I meant by I think one of the first things that we should do after the elections is if it is possible, if the new government's position is towards that, is actually confidence measurements and trust building processes, not full membership right away, not actually like the accession processes, but establishing grounds on which we could actually work together on Syria. We could talk together on actually refugee issue. We could work together actually on the Ukraine work. I will actually see those things, as possibility, and I think I think Western governments need to think about their relation with Turkey differently than right now. If the actually election result will create a change in Turkey in terms of Turkish foreign policy and Turkey's democratic navigation internally.
Thank you, Hocam. Gönül, 1 minute question. So are we seeing, is the crisis in Turkish Western relationships solely due to what's happening in Turkey, or is it also due to what's happening in the West?
Great question, Galip. And I posed that question to the two senators last week. I moderated a panel with two senators who are on the Human Rights Caucuses. And I want to be hopeful about that, but unfortunately, having lived in Washington for many years, I've become cynical about that. We have a Biden administration who promised to put democracy and human rights, make democracy and human rights the backbone of its foreign policy, and yet he shook hands with Mohammed bin Salman. So unfortunately, I think the consensus, especially here, has been what Erdogan does to its own people is not our concern, as long as he behaves on the foreign policy front. So that's a very Cold War lens, but it's still there and it's still strong. So that's why I think Turkey's authoritarian turn has never been considered an existential problem, even a real problem for Western countries. So if there's a democratic Turkey, I think things will change. But it's a great question in the sense that because we always talk about whether a new government is going to change Turkey's foreign policy posture, but it's not just up to the new government, right? Because it won't be operating in a vacuum. It will depend on how this new government is perceived by the West.
Yes.
And I'm not sure there's going to be a dramatic change, because the United States is not just about Turkey, but it's about where the US sees itself in the world, and I think it's quite prone to it's worried about its waning leverage, and it's quite prone to cultivating transactional relationships, meaning autocracy or democracy won't make a dramatic difference from Western point of view.
Authoritarian Turkey minus Russia, cooperation with Russia, doesn't seem to be a bad thing for US, from what I understood. You had 2 fingers, and also I will pose you like 1-minute question. So, is an authoritarian or a democratic Turkey more of a challenge for EU? So.
I was just going to say, since we're in a Western institution and since the question asks from the Western perspective, that the West should not give up on Turkey, because now they're actually seeing what kind of a society Turkey has, with all its energy, with all its willingness to make things happen, and the youth as well, so dynamic. So don't give up on Turkey.
Güney.
I think in terms of the strength of institutionalization of foreign policy, it is less of a challenge than an authoritarian government. But in terms of, if you look at specific issues like, for example, the refugee issue, an autocratic government can go against, the general public view on that and can make deals with Europe. But a more democratic government can lead actually here to a solution that Europe might not like. And as I argued these issues are more like realistic or real red lines compared to the others. When it comes to specific countries, we see, for example, on Libya, Europe is divided. On Iraq, Europe is also not on the same page with itself. And in Syria, we see a dissonance between European narrative and European actions, for example. On even Ukraine or China, I mean, we see differences. So for a democratic Turkey to be on the same page with Europe is actually an anomaly, because the Western world behaves differently, and a democratic Turkey can be less predictable than an autocratic one. Because an autocratic government wants to remain in power, and you can actually predict better their behavior.
Well, I know we are already, but one last question, one final question, please.
Yes, Dr. Nadeau, member of Chatham House from the United States. The West has been characterized as having a high-maintenance relationship with Turkey. From the Turkish perspective, what are 2 things the United States could do to make that relationship just a little bit easier?
I think US has a fragmented policy on many issues and ad hoc responses to the relations with Turkey. So, like, you have a problem in northern Syria, let's resolve it, by ad hoc solutions. Or you have, like, or you do this in Ukraine, or then it will be fine. I think, leading, with non-fragmented kind of policy, like State Department is acting in one way, in NATO you see different acts, and Pentagon or CENTCOM is acting in a different way, and they usually don't go to the deep inside the real problems. The Kurdish issue, as I mentioned, is one issue that we can focus on, because US is actually uniquely positioned to put pressure on every possible actor that has problems, like on the Kurds, different Kurds in different countries, and on the Turkish government, economically and otherwise. But US hardly was present in this issue. For example, much less than they were in like peace process in Colombia, for example. Which, I think it's a kind of a blind spot that US doesn't see that this one small issue, resolution of that issue, can resolve multiple strategic issues. Turkey has with the US vis-a-vis Syria, vis-a-vis Russia, vis-a-vis the rest of the Middle East. So I think that's one thing that US should focus on.
Well, thank you very, very much. And I deeply apologize, because we have already still another 14 questions in the chat box and many questions in the audience. So I'm terribly sorry. But I think we will have another event once we have the election. We will know the results. So the question will not be theoretical. Probably it will be more concrete. And I hope the answer will be equally concrete. But thank you very much for joining us for this lovely evening in London, so for sparing time for us rather than for nice weather, which is not, you know, the normalcy in the city. So thank you very much again, and thank you very much to also the people online, Fuat Hocam, Gönül, and also many people joining us online. And also thank you, Yaprak, thank you, Güney, and thank you to you. Thank you very much.